Hello and welcome once again to episode 51 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
So before we get into our main topic, it's time once again for our IndieAppSpotlight. So today we are checking out Daily Time Tracking by Niels Mouthen, a Mac status bar app. So Daily starts off by asking you what are you currently up to and tracks how long you spend on that task. At the end of the day, tallies and summaries are taken, making it easy to review where your time went. Additionally, you can schedule when your time should be tracked and automatically apply an activity when you need it. Daily is free to try and costs only $3.49 a month or $19.99 a year to unlock all its features, so please be sure to support Niels and check it out today. And if you are an indie app developer, we want to hear from you. Please reach out to us on Twitter at CodeCompletion via DM, and we'll spotlight your app in the future as well. So for our main topic today, we wanted to discuss our predictions for Apple's Unleashed event. And there are indications that we'll be getting faster than light travel. That seems to be what the poster card says.
Yep.
And as we know from every Apple poster card, that is exactly what is announced at the event. So I'm betting on new HomePods.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I mean, what else could they announce? New AirPods, right? That's definitely gonna be what everyone is expecting.
Yeah, they make you run 20% faster when you're working out or something like that. That's what I hear on the street. Something like that.
And what else could go faster? Like a new Apple TV? Like we got a new remote, but the Apple TV is kind of eh. Like the Apple TV could go faster, right?
Yeah, I mean, they just updated it, but really, I mean...
It wasn't that much of an update.
No, I mean, we need like 8K because, everyone has an 8K TV now. If you don't, I mean, come on. What are you doing with your life? Seriously.
And then iPad Pros, those are definitely haven't been updated in so long, I feel like.
No, and honestly, an M1... I mean,
not that amazing anymore.
If we're getting to the point where we're kind of branching into, desktop chips, they should just throw in like a Xeon or something, make it on par with the Mac Pro, not, just the MacBook Air. That's the next logical step, in my opinion.
So what is it that everyone is so excited about? Because at least from my point of view, it feels like people are way more excited about this event than the iPhone event for ungodly reasons. So what is it that everyone is excited about?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the possibility of the next generation of Apple Silicon. If we're being serious now, I think by and large, Apple Silicon has been very well received. It runs fairly well. I mean, we've benchmarked it more or less, maybe not very scientifically, against our own devices, and they seem to compete with, anecdotally, with iMac Pros. And I know that my M1 MacBook Air tends to perform better than my 2019 MacBook Pro with an i9 in it. So there are some serious features, or rather, I don't know, specifications, performance improvements that Apple's made in here that have some limitations. Like I know that one that bugs Fernando a ton is the lack of multiple displays, right? You can have one extra display max if you're on a laptop, or two if you're on a Mac Mini. So although it is a great chip overall, it does have its limitations, and we've seen those. No external GPU support through Thunderbolt. So, there are some things that need to be worked out. But by and large, it's been great. And so I think we're all ready to see, all right, we've given Apple, has it been quite a year? Yeah, almost a year. They launched it last November. What is the next generation of this? The M1X, whatever they're going to call it, the M2. I think most people are kind of leaning towards it being called the M1X. And just being able to now make the switch over to Apple Silicon, now that we really have had a year to test it and know, yeah, things work great. The Rosetta 2 translation is great. So if you do need to use x86 based apps, they work fine, and you really can't tell. At least I can't tell.
Yeah, and
So
I've
I
read
think,
that Rosetta 2 is even better for some things like Homebrew. It's just like run it in Rosetta 2. It works way better than the M1 variant because not everything has been updated for the M1,
yeah,
especially like open source tooling. And that's the part that kind of takes the longest to kind of get there. Even though like you would think, oh, it's being recompiled for my machine specifically, that should make it work immediately, but unfortunately it doesn't. So I think that it's going to be like Apple gave themselves a timeline, and then the whole world kind of imploded on itself.
yes,
So we don't know if Apple will be able to kind of maintain that timeline of being able to transition everything over, but they started with a very strong step in the right direction with the MacBook Airs, the Mac Mini, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the reintroduction of color in their Mac line with the new iMacs. So I guess it's probably interesting to think about whether it will be an M1X or if it will be an M2, right? Presumably, an M2 will be based off of the A15 processor cores, whereas an M1X will be based off of the A14 processor cores, or the ones in the M1 just expanded out to have more processing capabilities, right?
yeah.
So what direction do you think Apple will kind of go into?
Yeah, it's a good question. And remind me here, or correct me if I'm wrong. I think the M1 and A14 by extension were on a 7 nanometer process, and the A15 is on a 5 nanometer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, I know that they are for sure the number one. I don't know what you call it, company that schedules time at TSMC.
Just a
To
customer.
your
Just a
customer,
regular old
yeah,
customer.
for silicon manufacturing on their 5 nanometer process. So I would not be surprised whatsoever if we do get a 5 nanometer chip. I don't know if that's going to be called the M1X or M2. I think I'm on board with you, which you would probably call that an M2, just as the next generation, not kind of a talk like a TikTok like Intel used to do, as kind of a smaller upgrade. But again, like you said, just with everything that's happening, with all the supply chains in everything, I don't know, but they seem to have had relative success with new iPhones, right, which are on the 5 nanometer process as well, and the new iPads as well. Uh, so yeah, I think it's absolutely possible they could have a new generation of the M series.
So if we are on a new generation of the M series, do you think we get something that they're going to name different than an M2, like an M2X? So that way, when a MacBook Air comes out that updates the previous MacBook Air, that one will just be the lowly M2 compared to the expanded one?
I'd say so. It's going to be really interesting how they they name their chips, just because, like, if we go back to
We're on the
Apple chips,
B1.
well, yeah, well, and they do things like they call it, A12X, A12Z, but then they go to like Bionic because of neural engines, and it's like, kind of is a weird naming convention where, hey, it's better than like what Intel does, so that's great, but yeah, I think they'll probably do something like M1 or M2 for the lower end, the Mac Mini, the MacBook Air. M1X or M1, I can see them doing like P for Pro or S for speed, because they're all about speed, 5G and all that. So
5G, 5G, 5G.
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 Those are such good videos. I love those compilations.
So
No,
not
go
meaning
for it, yeah.
to distract us, but so I guess what Apple could also do is they come out with like an M2 series of higher end more professional computers than that lowly MacBook Air that is like faster than most things, but never mind that. So then when the new MacBook Air comes out and they want to use a lower spec chip than the the super sized M2 that is in like the MacBook Pros that we'll talk about in a moment. Maybe they come out with, as you said, an M2L for light or an M2A
Sure.
for Air. Like I can see all sorts of different naming conventions that come out of nowhere just specifically for this.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised. And one thing I am really interested to see is I'm just looking at Mac Rumors, like their buyer's guide that shows how often Apple releases a new device, and they are they've more or less been on track for, you know, yearly ish, sometimes bi-yearly averages of releases. And so I'm wondering, are they going to now, with their own silicon, keep up with the yearly release standard that they have for handheld devices like iPads and iPhones? Or are they going to maybe do something like they keep the Mac Mini and the MacBook Air on maybe like a 2-year cycle and then only update the Pro models? You know, I don't know. I guess the good part about that is where I would never have considered in my entire life using a MacBook Air as sort of, you know, for anything hardcore, not hardcore, but anything more than web browsing, right? Like compiling code or anything that would take forever. But my MacBook Air, my M1, works fantastic, and I would absolutely keep this machine because it works just fine. I don't think they necessarily need to update them yearly on sort of the lower end, but I think the you know, pro demographic that needs that would of course enjoy a yearly update.
Yeah, and I remember back, like, before Apple was super popular, they would just come out with a new computer. There wouldn't necessarily always be some big fanfare or event for it. It would just be time for a new computer to come out, and then all of a sudden the page is updated. You can't order the old one anymore. You can only order the new one. And Apple really hasn't done that in quite a while, I would say. In terms of how they go ahead and plan new machines to be new products to be released. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see if they stay on the more or less yearly cadence as you brought up, or if they increase. I hope they don't increase it, because it's always good to be able to say, hey, if you need a computer, just buy whatever Apple has, instead of that really awkward time when they haven't updated the MacBook Air in like years, and then it's like you hesitate to even recommend it anymore, which is like where Apple was for an unfortunately long time with several different configurations. The Mac Mini like spent 3 or 4 years before any update, and it was a minor update at that. The Mac Pro famously, it's like that. I hope Apple can get out of that and back onto a yearly cadence of boring updates. And that's boring in the best possible way, because if you need a computer, you can just buy one, and it's always going to be faster than the one you bought a year ago. And that's, I think, a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, you look at phone reviews and they're like, is this a, I don't know quite how they word it, but they're just like, it's an okay update. It's like there's nothing major, but phones are at the point where I don't know what else you're going to do with it to make it a major update, right? They put the new high refresh rate screen in. They added some stuff to the cameras, and you're like, sweet, this is a great update. If you're in the market for a phone now, buy the 12. If you can wait a few months or whatever, not now, but never mind. The example is getting complicated. My point is, phones are phones, and they're all pretty much good at this point. So I'm sure that with Apple Silicon, they're kind of going to get to that point where, at least I hope the refresh cycle is not too long, maybe 2 years at the most, in my opinion. Like, my mom has an M1 MacBook Air too, and it smokes her MacBook Pro that we bought her in, I don't know, 2015 or so. Right? She could keep using that for what she does for a long time. So Interesting that you brought up the Mac Pro though, because that did not get updated for over 2,000 days, from 2013. That is interesting. So, do we think that the new Mac Pro is going to get an update?
Oh, definitely. That's the
year?
first product that they're gonna come out with on the event, and they're gonna say can't innovate anymore, my ass, and they're gonna come out straight out of the gate, and we're saying we have a brand new Mac Pro. It looks like the old one. It does not even have Apple Silicon.
Yeah.
So, based on the rumors and more than rumors, leaks, it seems like Apple is working on a brand new Mac Pro, and not a minor update to it. So, if you don't know how computers are put together, it's not like you can just take off one chip and put like a new chip and everything else is more or less unchanged. For every new generation of CPU, you pretty much have to redesign the motherboard to work for that generation of chip. And you basically get one motherboard per type of chip that you're going to put on there. So Intel did come out with a new generation of workstation Xeons, and they basically smoke the last generation in good ways, and hopefully in ways that bring it closer in terms of single core performance to what we now are used to with an M1, but really expand the boundaries of what you can do with multi-core performance. If you need massive amounts of memory, massive amounts of expandability. So in all those areas, the M1 is not at all a competitor. It's not even a consideration. Right. So I think it really is important that Apple does maintain this computer, especially once they've cornered themselves, not once, but several times in thermal corners, once with the cylinder 2013 Mac Pro, once with the iMac Pro, where they just couldn't update it anymore. And hopefully they said, well, this one has plenty of headroom, so they should be able to use a similar design for the system, but just tweak the motherboard like implementation such that it can handle these new chips. So for a bit more details, the last generation of chips was Intel's Cascade Lake Xeon workstation processors, and now we're on Ice Lake Xeon workstation processors. They go from W3200 or something to W33. So minor spec bump there, but there's no longer any differentiation between the type of chip that you get and the amount of memory that it can support. They're all 4 terabytes now. They all support PCIe 4.0, yep. 4.0, which is double the speed of 3.0. And like overall, there's a lot of improvements there. So I really hope Apple does kind of keep this machine going, especially if it's going to take them longer to make a true Apple Silicon Mac Pro with expandability in mind, with massive amounts of RAM in mind, with massive amounts of cores in mind. So if they can't do that just yet, they should double down and continue providing a great Mac Pro that's the very highest end computer, and I think their customers will see it as a good thing that they are updating this machine. It's not a dead end yet again. There might be some people that are just not buying the Mac Pro because they're like, yeah, fool me once, shame on me, but fool me twice, shame on you, kind of thing. So they may not ever buy another Mac Pro until you kind of prove that you are going to keep it coming, even if it is low volume in general. I have seen them in the wild. I have seen people like love their Mac Pros, so it's not that out of the ordinary. I mean, even the iMac Pro is something that was well loved. It was just never updated anymore. So I do think that we are going to get this machine. The question is, will we get it during this event next week? Which is questionable, because if, as you said, it's all about Apple Silicon, then what place does this machine have if it's not Apple Silicon, right?
Yeah. I can definitely see them just kind of doing one of those like, oh, and hey, we also kind of updated the Mac Pro, and not, glossing over it a little bit, but
it's a press release at the end of the event kind of thing.
Exactly. It's not, I I'm sure it's not their main moneymaker, as expensive as they are. Just volume wise, there's no way that they're selling enough to keep up with, $900 MacBook Airs. But they go up to a 28 core processor right now. I want to say the Ice Lake ones go up to 32, or maybe they stick with 28. I can't remember. Either way,
they go up to 38.
38. Okay, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of cores. And if we're on 8 right now, kind of. I mean, 4 and 4, right? 4 performance, 4 efficiency. That's a big jump, and I have no doubt that Apple's engineers are fantastic, but that's a big jump, and maybe they pull it out, and that's great. But also, I can see them updating the Ice Lake, giving us another year or two, maybe. No doubt that they'll come out with an Apple Silicon Mac Pro, but I think the question is when.
It buys them time.
It buys them time, and you also have to think about not just about core count, but you've got things like PCIe lanes, right, where a normal consumer chip has like 20 lanes, and generally 16 are taken up by like a graphics card, for example, and all your lanes are gone, then you've got enough for like a high-speed drive, whereas server-grade processors like these Intel Xeons or the AMD EPYC ones have like 128 lanes. There's a lot more than just the core count and the frequency of the processor that needs to be kind of worked out. And I don't know, just from the M1 itself, where they were focusing on probably efficiency rather than all of these other features, like they didn't, again, have eGPU support, which isn't necessarily due to PCIe lanes, but they left out a lot of features that were maybe at this point have come to be expected. So
yeah, even the 2 Thunderbolt port limitation, that is because there's just not enough lanes. They use them all for everything else that the system is doing.
And the 2018 Mac Mini had 4, right?
Yeah, and it's still for sale.
Yeah, so, exactly. I think they'll stick with Intel for a little while longer. I don't know if that's due to necessity or contractual obligations or both, but I would guess that they're not quite ready for replacing every Mac into using Apple Silicon yet.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting you brought up price for the Mac Pro, because we tend to think of it as like the joke most expensive computer ever sold. Like if you max it out, I think it comes out to like $54,000 or something. Ridiculous. That said, as much as we can pin a lot of price hiking on Apple for memory, don't buy memory if you can swap it out yourself. Like they use standard chips. So buy those chips yourself. You will save tons of money in the long run, and you might be able to get way more than you would have otherwise been comfortable with purchasing directly from Apple, and it doesn't void your warranty or anything. So if you can get your own chips and put them inside your computer, which is exceedingly rare, like it's only in the Mac Pro now, then definitely go with that solution. But that said, their prices for the actual chips themselves, like the CPUs and the GPUs, is not that out of the ordinary. So for example, on the current Mac Pro, you can get the standard 8-core Intel Xeon W processor, yada yada, and that comes standard. And you can upgrade it in a series of core increments up to the 28 core, which is a $7,000 upgrade. You might be wondering, hey, Apple, why are you milking me for this $7,000? But if you look at the MSRPs for that chip series that Intel has set, so basically this is a price that Intel sets saying, hey, we're going to make money off of this. And then you, the person selling this chip, are also going to make some profit off of this. So if everyone kind of sets the prices around this point, then everything is more or less fair. It's a manufacturer suggested retail price. So if you look at those retail prices, that same 8-core chip that they start with is $750. So if you kind of subtract that from the beginning or add $750 to everything else, these prices are going to make sense, because if you jump up to the 28-core chip, that is a $7,500 chip that Apple is putting in. So these prices that you see on the current Mac Pro page of price increments for both the CPU and also the GPUs, especially since GPUs are now being heavily resource constrained due to crypto mining, this is actually not a bad deal in terms of like what you're getting for the money. Not saying that you need a $7,000 chip, but the point I'm trying to make is Intel's new Ice Lake processors, they go from $950 on the low end to $4,500 on the high end, which means that we are likely going to see a cheaper, ridiculous Mac Pro as a result of this. Just because the chips are not going to be as expensive. Apple's not going to charge $7,000 for a $4,000 like increment. So we'll likely see something more affordable on the CPU side. We've seen something more affordable come in on the GPU side because that can come completely separate. It's board agnostic, as you will. And hopefully Apple can keep the whole MPX scheme that they've been going with, and they can reuse a lot of this, these improvements that they've been working on. Now, the part that's going to make the new Mac Pro even more ridiculous is the fact that the new processors support 8 lanes of memory, which tap out at 4 terabytes, I think, which is a lot more than 1.5 terabytes that Apple currently sells at, let me check, $25,000. So that is going to be fun, just to kind of max out the configurator and see like what's the new most ridiculous Mac. But once again, don't buy memory from Apple. Buy the minimum you can. You can likely even sell those chips, or just add to them. Like you get what it comes with, and then you add more larger chips to your configuration, and that works fine. So if you are in the market for Mac Pro, I would wait, honestly. Especially since it seems highly likely that Apple's coming out with a new one. There are leaks within Xcode itself that they want to use Intel scalable processors for this machine. So I think it's only a matter of time.
Yeah. Just kind of to hit again on the memory side. If you go to like OWC or Mac Sales, you can get any amount of RAM for about half, 1.5 terabytes for $12,250. So it's a lot of money, but it's also half the money. So yeah, memory is definitely something. It's super easily upgradable as well if you've never done it. And there are indicators on the little covers on the Mac Pro where the memory goes to show you which ones you put them in. If you don't buy all 8 sticks of memory, it's like very easy.
Like you could do it wrong and the computer will be fine. It's just not going to be optimal. It's literally the easiest upgrade anyone can do as long as you can actually get into the computer. Not possible with like the iMac Pro easily, but super easy with the Mac Pro where you just lift the thing off.
They're not soldered.
Put the chips in. Yeah.
Yeah. And one cool thing about the graphics card is we noticed a while ago that they upgraded the so when the Mac Pro came out, the like current generation of GPUs were the 5000 series from AMD because Apple doesn't support NVIDIA graphics cards. They upgraded now to the 6000 series, which came out maybe a year or so ago. I can't remember. But a lot of these GPUs are also not, as far as I know, for sale anywhere else. And so they're not like their consumer grade graphics cards. They're like workstation ones with like some of them have like 2 GPU chips, I guess.
On the same board.
On the same board and everything. So they're very unique. They're custom. I wouldn't be surprised if Apple is the only one that can get these these GPUs right now, especially like Dimitri said.
Good luck getting the consumer ones.
Oh yeah, I mean,
but you can if you're okay with a more mediocre graphics card that is not twice the price, then you can definitely get the consumer one, and that's what something like the Mac Pro allows, which is super neat. So again, it depends what your trade-offs are. The reason why we have workstation cards that are twice, 3 times, 4 times the price is because they have to be absolutely perfect. If you're rendering a movie and it takes like several days to render a scene, you don't want a mistake. If one mistake, you have to redo it. And if you redo it and there's a mistake in that one too, like that computer is useless to you. Whereas if you have a card that you're getting purely for enjoyment, you're playing games,
Right.
not necessarily relying on the data that's coming off of it, you might see a glitch, one frame out of like every few days that you're using it, and it's not even going to be a big glitch. It might be something super minor, but like what can be catastrophic in one set of situations can be totally okay in a different set, and that's why you have these wildly different costs on the same chips, which for all intents and purposes do the same thing. So that's why they're more expensive. Use that information wisely, because if you don't need it, then you don't necessarily need to spend all that extra money. You do get a fanless card, which sounds better, but that's about the only difference from that perspective.
One last thing I wanted to mention. Sorry, the reason I wanted to mention the upgrade.
We all really want Mac Pros. That's why.
Yeah, no, come on. I mean, come on. Who doesn't have a $9,600 dual graphic card setup? Come on. No, the reason I wanted to mention the update to the new series of AMD GPUs is that Apple's doing something with the current Mac Pro already. They're already letting you upgrade at least components of the Mac Pro itself. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get, like Dimitri's saying, a new upgrade to the Ice Lake chips, which are more recently released. I think we checked a couple months ago, and they were literally released like that week.
Yeah, they're just starting to make it onto Geekbench. Like these are right off the press, like not widely available, I would say, especially since there's just reviews. Like that's the only articles that you can find about these are review units. So it might just be taking Intel some time to manufacture them, and therefore Apple does not have a high enough capacity for their super limited capacity computer.
Yeah. So
like
I don't know
if it could always come down to that.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't know if they just kind of make it a footnote on the end of the announcement, or if it really is more like a shadow launch and they just say, "Oh, by the way, end of the year or something. Oh, by the way, we'll have these in the spring or something." I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if we still have an Intel Mac Pro next year, at least first half of the year.
So while we're speculating, I think there is one way we might see it within the keynote, and that is if it does have an M2 coprocessor. Do you think Apple would consider something like that?
That's interesting.
Like there's space on the board.
I was just going to bring that up. I think that would be a very, very interesting thing to have both an Intel chip and an Apple Silicon chip. I don't know how you do that. I'm sure you could pull it off. The interoperability between completely different architectures, that's super interesting, but also not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, they wrote Rosetta, so I'm sure they could, figure that out. So if you'd get a lot. I mean, you'd get like the hardware encoding of H.265 and everything. Not to mention just being able to probably run ARM apps, right? Like iOS apps and everything natively, which would be super cool, especially for development.
Yeah, so the way I can see this is maybe the kernel is running basically entirely on the M2, and any Intel process that you choose, like there's a little checkbox when you open Command I on an app, and you can choose to run it like under Rosetta or under native if it does have both. So I can foresee allowing professionals to choose on this specific machine, hey, I want to run this process entirely on the Intel side of things because it does have so many more resources available for it. And at that point, the system is completely freed up to dedicate that chip to that one application, more or less. And that could be immensely powerful. Like, for the most part, CPUs are already prepared to do this. Like, they run each application in complete isolation from everything else. So from the CPU's point of view, I don't see too many difficulties with getting something like this working, especially when you have very smart people at Apple figure it out for us. But it is within the realm of possibilities. And that's the part that I wanted to kind of highlight is this is something that could happen. I don't know if it's the thing that we'll see, but it could include the Mac Pro in with everything that we are seeing that's coming out, without necessarily removing it from Intel in the process.
Yeah. I mean, this is to a much lesser degree, but am I wrong in saying that like the T2 chip in the current Intel Macs are just like older
they're
A
A10s.
series? Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're kind of already, there's a little interoperability. I don't think it would be quite on the same level that you're talking about, but I guess there's a little bit of precedent for that anyway.
Yeah, like they're already doing hardware encoding through those chips rather than through the Intel chips, because Apple's hardware encoders are just that much better.
Right.
So, like, I can see the Intel chip being the coprocessor to the Apple Silicon chip that is kind of the brains of the operation. But the Apple Silicon chip doesn't necessarily need to have a huge amount of lanes for all the expandability at that point. It just kind of makes its lanes available to the Intel chip to communicate with it. And from that point forward, it just communicates with the Intel chip and offloads all the things that need to be Intel specific onto that chip. That chip has access to all 4 terabytes of memory that it needs, but an Apple Silicon app would not have access to those 4 terabytes. It would just use whatever on-package memory is available. And I could totally see that working fine. I mean, if you know you're going to need something to run a certain card, then that's probably good enough, right?
Yeah. I think that's an interesting compromise. I'd be very happy to see something like that.
Okay, so that said, what most people are expecting at this event is not a Mac Pro.
No.
Let's be completely clear. Everyone really, really wants new MacBook Pros. So what kind of new MacBook Pros does everyone want, and what do you think we'll actually get?
Yeah, I think they just want whatever the next series is going to be, the M2, M1X, whatever it is. I think we were just talking yesterday or something, and I said, even if there are no performance improvements per se, like clock speed, IPC, but it's just purely they give us like double the cores or something, and add the ability to have more external displays or something for Fernando. That would be great. I would be more than happy with that because, like I said already, my MacBook Air kind of crushes my work MacBook Pro that is probably double the price of it. So I can't really say that my expectations are low in a good way, I suppose, where I'm sure
there's not much that needs to change to make you happy.
No, I mean, I'm so pleasantly surprised my experience this year with my M1 MacBook Air that it can only really go up from here. So one thing I have noticed is when I use my work laptop not in clamshell mode, but I'm actually just using it as a normal laptop, it feels absolutely massive to me as a 16-inch MacBook Pro. So I hope that they'll allow the specs to be the same for the 16 and supposed 14-inch, and I would probably just go with the smaller one because it's more portable, and I just feel like I am carrying, I don't know, a cinder block with me everywhere when I use the 16-inch. So I hope for a smaller one that still has, the same capabilities, where sometimes they kind of limit that to the larger models.
Yeah.
That's just me.
So, ironically enough, that is like the only way to use the 16-inch MacBook Pro is as a laptop. If you try to plug it into monitors and power and all that, the discrete GPU kicks in, and then the whole system is like permanently thermal throttled, which makes it the most disappointing Mac I've ever used. I actively dislike anything turning on that computer, because then the fans will just be running, and the kernel task will be running at 100%, and that's like a self-preservation tactic where it prevents other applications from using the CPU, so that way it can cool down, and it's just permanently in that state, and it's for me unusable. I cannot use that computer, whereas the M1 iMac that I use is about as fast as the iMac Pro that I also have. And unfortunately, it has a quarter of the memory. So
Right.
it's not anywhere close in terms of that capacity. But it's $1,500 computer compared to a $12,000 computer. And that's pretty ridiculous. So, like you said, I'm really looking forward to these new MacBook Pros just because I'm hoping that they don't need to have multiple things in them. If it's just Apple's one chip, and let there be a fan, please. Because I don't think I'll hear that fan very often if it's a chip that Apple makes, even if it is super powered compared to the MacBook Airs. Like, I never hear the fan in the iMac that I have that has fans. It's just a thing that is in there that I don't pay attention to. So I'm totally happy with it to have a fan. I just don't want it to have the need for things like a discrete GPU, because that really prevents it from doing anything useful. And like you said, hopefully this chip will be able to have more than one external display. Something I really enjoyed having with my computers is a large display space for me to put all my stuff on, because I have a lot going on in my head at once, and it's useful to have a lot of space for that. And it's just something that's not possible on the M1 series of computers. So hopefully this is the new generation that kind of enables more than one or two displays. Hopefully it's not limited to two. Hopefully we can have a few more than that. But like, again, back to the Mac Pro, you can have like 16 displays if you counted the 4K ones. It's a bit ridiculous. You can have fewer 5K displays than 6K displays, which is ironic, because the 6K ones use display stream compression, whereas the 5K ones don't. So yeah, you can have the least amount of 5K displays, but it's still like a stupid amount. So hopefully Apple can kind of show up their Mac Pro a little bit and say like, hey, you didn't think you could have 6 displays on this computer, but you can. And that would be really neat. That said, the rumors are that it will only have 2 Thunderbolt ports, which makes me immediately sad because that means fewer displays. But it will have the return of the HDMI port, the return of the SD card slot, and the return of MagSafe.
Those are all awesome. I really, really do hope that Apple kind of backtracks a little bit, because as soon as they did that, it was like, awesome, now we have to do dongles. And then everyone laughed at Apple. And then now everyone is doing that on their own, Windows laptops and whatever. And it's just like, at least those other computers have things like an HDMI port, and it's not limited to just USB-C ports. Where, you can buy a dongle, it's no big deal, but it's also like you have to remember to put the dongle in your backpack when you leave, and it's just a whole pain. Where if we had an HDMI port and even like one USB-A port, that would be awesome. Personally, I would love that. I don't know. I think, I can definitely see MagSafe returning. They have finally embraced MagSafe in iOS devices, which is great, and I love it, and I think it's a great addition. So they've not necessarily given up on the concept of magnetic charging like that, whether
what if it's just a puck that goes in the back of the monitor?
Right on the Apple logo. That'd be interesting.
It looks like in hospitals when they're like checking a patient's heart rhythm or something like that, and they put the telescope.
That's exactly what it would look like. They also work as headphones. You just put them in.
It's dual purpose.
Back of your, heck yeah, dude. Wireless. I mean, yeah.
There are wires going to somewhere.
Yeah.
But not connecting directly. It's wireless.
But I think my biggest asks would be an HDMI port for sure. SD card slot's really cool. I don't personally use SD cards a ton.
I've never used it. And the one time that I needed to use it, it wasn't fast enough. So we had to get an external little thing anyways. So I do not see the point of this. Yeah. I know everyone's like, oh, it's the only way to have cameras and stuff like that. 1, no one has cameras anymore. 2, if you have a camera, you can plug it in directly. I never saw the bad thing about that. You then don't need to take the card out of your camera. But apparently people don't like that. I don't understand it.
Yeah, I was gonna say I only really used it when I was in high school and college for things like transferring photos and videos because my camera didn't support transferring directly from the camera. Um, but yeah, I mean, like you said, no, like no one has a camera anymore. So those photographers that do and aren't using something like a red, with their own proprietary whatever, um, get a dongle and that's fine. I think I don't know.
Yeah, at this
I'm
point,
with
I don't think
Apple.
the SD cards are like the limiting thing,
No,
right?
no, 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 no. I mean, yeah, but like
Anyways,
HDMI port, that's huge. I think
it's
that would be
not
awesome.
unlike VGA. It's not like HDMI is not being used, right?
Yeah,
It's everywhere. It's continuously being improved. It's getting faster every year. There's no point to not have this port. And for the longest time, all Apple computers had like a crappy HDMI 1.8 port instead of the 2.0 and now 2.0A, B, and 2.1
yep,
series of ports that came after that. So it was like super disappointing for the longest time that HDMI port that was in the computers because there were newer port standards available. Apple just never used it. So
yeah,
if the HDMI port does come back, I hope Apple uses the latest standards for it. Please, at the very least, when the computer comes out, like use the latest standard.
yeah. Well, they're using the latest standard on the new Apple TV, right? It's
Yeah,
got
the
HDMI 2.1.
Yeah, and then the Mac Minis that also came out also have 2.0 AB, which support HDR.
Oh,
So at the very least, the latest computers have the latest one. But for like the longest time, we were stuck at HDMI 1.8, and that
yeah.
was just miserable because you couldn't connect to like a 4K screen decently with
The
it. So it's a useless
the only
port.
the only thing I can think of is like I don't know if you can fit an HDMI cable on like the current thickness of MacBook Pro, and they could just say like, "Oh, just use a USB-C cable because it's got display over USB-C," and it's like, yeah, but like
I think they can make
then
it
you have to
slightly
buy.
thicker. It is
Yeah,
it is quite the height off the table. If you like look at it from the side,
yeah,
like it does round from the bottom of the case, so they can make that part thicker, without it being too unreasonable.
that's fair. Another one that would be cool, which I don't personally use a ton either, would be like a better camera. And that's something I'm way surprised that Apple hasn't really embraced too much. Like the new iMac has the ultra or not ultra wide, but the wide angle camera with what do they call it?
Uh, that thing that follows you,
Yeah, the thing that follows you, whatever that is. Like they're kind of
center
updating the
stage, center
cameras.
stage.
Center stage. But it's been like a 720p camera for like easily 5 years or so. So it'd be nice to like I guess at least get that to 1080p. Um,
And it's
but
it's pretty well like the reason why it is a 720p camera is because there's just no room in that
okay,
display case.
yes,
But there's something new coming this year that happens to make the display a little thicker. Maybe.
which is
Which
mini
is
LED.
mini LED screens,
Yeah,
so that way you can have HDR. So if the screen is getting thicker anyways, and you do now have some more room, then what's the harm using all the pre-purchased 1080 cameras that you were going to use in old iPads, I guess, on your Macs, or better yet, use a 4K camera if there's enough room for it.
yeah,
I don't think the jump from 1080 to 4K is that much bigger of a sensor nowadays, at least for the lowest end of the lowest end sensor. Like it doesn't need to be able to take amazing shots. It just needs to make pretty good shots.
yeah. I think if we're going along those lines and saying the top of the laptop's going to be thicker, just throw in the whole Face ID array and let us have that. Touch ID is great, and I love Touch ID on my MacBook Air, but Face ID would be sweet. I think that would be way more welcome than a better webcam, but that's just me.
Well, it would come together, right? Like
Yeah,
you would need a better webcam to support Face ID.
I suppose so.
And then all the clamshell people are going to be like, well, how am I supposed to use my computer? Not to
I
mention,
use my
they wouldn't
laptop
be able
and
to use the Touch ID anyways.
yeah, exactly. That's how I use my laptop. I just type in my password.
You can
but
get the new keyboard since it will be an M
That's
generation computer.
true. That's true. That's a good point. And all the sweet colors. Ooh, that would be another cool thing.
The
which I
colors
don't
are not
think
for
they're gonna
sale,
do.
surprisingly enough. The colored keyboards and accessories, they are not for sale.
You have to buy the iMac.
Yeah, you have to buy the iMac and then throw away the iMac, and then you got to keep the accessories.
Throw it just. Well, that's all I need. That would be really cool though if they did colored MacBook Pros. I don't know if they will, but it'd be really cool.
I mean, okay, so let's consider this. The original iMac, the first one, came out in colors, right? And it came out alongside a series of clamshell iBooks. And those clamshell iBooks were the same colors as the iMacs.
Ooh.
So
That would
maybe
be so cool. I would love a colored MacBook Pro. I don't know. I'm so happy that they're embracing color, and I hope that they keep going. It's cool. I mean, people loved like the iPhone 5C because they were all colorful, but now we're getting iPhones that are colorful too.
just in all the wrong colors.
Well, I don't know. They've got some cool colors. Are you talking about the iMacs or the iPhones?
The iPhones. The iMacs are better colors than the iPhones.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So,
I don't know. I like this
since
color.
you bring in colors, maybe there will be a new MacBook Air that comes out in colors, M2, and then in that same presentation, they're like, well, if you need something more powerful than a MacBook Air, here's your MacBook Pro, and then those have no colors. That's how you know it's Pro. To our chagrin. And that's going to be the one where it has a more powerful processor and all that, and then they can get around the whole M2X before an M2 kind of thing. Maybe.
Yeah, I can see that. That'd be fine. But like you were mentioning, using the not wanting like a discrete GPU in the MacBook Pros, I think along with just the CPU core enhancements, I'm sure they're just going to throw in a bunch more GPU cores. I mean, they've already proved that these things sip power, so there's no way that they can't just throw in.
I mean, they're going in compared to something that sips a whole lot more power. Right? That's the previous generation. So they have up until that point, really, to scale things. And if they can have it in such a way where it's not all used when it doesn't need to be used, then it will just use that much less power along the way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'd be surprised if they don't up the GPU count fairly significantly in at least the MacBook Pros.
Yeah, like I can definitely see, hey, you are on a long flight. You want to have all 16 hours of power available to you. You can go ahead and go to System Preferences and say, hey, like, can it with these extra cores? I don't want them right now. Just make this in a MacBook Air with a big battery, and I will be happy with that performance envelope for that entire duration. Whereas maybe you want to go ahead and say, I have 20 minutes to finish my render, and I'm on the go, I'm in a car, and I want to just use everything. I don't care about the amount of battery that I'm going to have left after this. But you really need to finish a piece of work. That might be an opportunity to use a high power mode, which some people are joking about early on, but it seems like that's actually a consideration. That would be really neat to be able to dynamically spin the computer's performance up or down depending on what you need, especially since it does have so much more headroom, right?
I've got it. I've got the link. They're going to put the MacBook Pro into hyperspeed, and that's what the event
that's
is.
That's the high powered mode. It's like, look how amazing this is, and then let's press high power mode.
It's just like a hyperspeed button, and it's like, and gets the stars and completes your Blender render in 5 minutes.
So on that note, what are they going to use to show off how much more performant this chip is compared to anything else?
Yeah, that's interesting.
What's the benchmark that they're going to use?
I'm sure that they'll throw in Final Cut Pro there. Rendering times on Final Cut Pro, maybe showing how many 4K tracks they can be playing at once, like they did with the with the Mac Pro. Since they did just announce that partnership with Blender, it would be really cool to see a Blender render in there. What else? Maybe something with like Affinity Photo or Darkroom.
Yeah, so let's pause on the Blender thing, because that did just get announced conspicuously right before an event, right?
Exactly.
That they are saying that they are bringing metal support to Blender's, I think it's called their Cycles renderer. And if you don't know anything about Blender, much like I didn't know anything about Blender 2 days ago until I started watching a bunch of tutorials, and then lo and behold, Apple makes this announcement. So it's all thanks to my curiosity. But it turns out in Blender, you can choose to render things in different ways depending on if you want an instant result, much like a 3D game engine. Like as you move your character, it's re-rendering every frame, right? So that's an instant result. Or if you want a photorealistic result, which is something that you set to render in the background, and it might take a few minutes, it might take several hours, depending on the complexity of your scene. And all of this is not available on Macs, really. At least not in Blender. I don't know about other 3D programs, but it seems like they kind of left the Mac scene a while ago. And it's a ton of work to rewrite your rendering engine using something else. So what Apple announced just earlier today as we record, which is on Thursday of the previous week of the event. So as this comes out, the event is like the same day or the next day. So we'll do our best to make that possible. Make us not sound like idiots for talking about stuff that's already been announced.
Yeah.
But so as of Thursday of the previous day, Apple became a something sponsor. They had a specific term of it for it, but this allows them to kind of be at the very top of their names, right up there with NVIDIA, AMD, and Facebook, oddly enough. And this comes with a benefit for Blender, a bunch of Apple engineers to write their metal rendering backend. So I don't know what the stipulations were for this. It seems like just the first parts have been merged in, like the setup basically of making sure that all of Blender's kernels can be even compiled in the metal shading language. But there were some comments by Apple engineers that basically said they can't wait for everyone to see it actually running on Apple Silicon through Metal, or on just larger Macs via Metal, because OpenCL has been deprecated for years. So it seems like they do have a working copy up until now. And it seems like conspicuous timing that this is right before an Apple event that is presumably all for HomePods. I mean, Macs, right? So I definitely see Blender as being a highlight in terms of showing off what these Macs can do. I mean, the Cylinder Mac Pro was a highlight during one of the WWDCs where people from Pixar were showing it, rendering their scene, and being immensely capable at doing that, because up until then, you don't generally have these kinds of GPUs in a workstation. You have it in a render farm over many, many computers. So being able to do this live has always been something that Apple kind of enjoyed doing. So I can definitely see them bringing creative people on to demo what these machines are truly capable of. And hopefully it's not like more video game demos that I'm endlessly uninterested in.
You don't want an AR video game demo? Come on, man.
No, not really. Especially not of Lego or Minecraft.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
So, yeah, I guess that hopefully that is like intentionally there, like as an early kind of preview that we can look forward to. And hopefully, or maybe not hopefully, but maybe it also spells the end of OpenGL for real. Like, hey, open source like holdovers, we really need you to get off of OpenGL, maybe for the next macOS release, because we're getting rid of it for good. It's been deprecated for a few years, and now it's time to move on. And we can't have your software or it would be really embarrassing for us if your software just stopped working and that was like the last thing that Mac users could use. So I could see this as being kind of the push that Apple needs software to make, because Metal has been out for a lot of years at this point, and adoption has been good in terms of some game engines for iOS, but for anything else, no one has really cared. So this is Apple just making them care by developing it themselves. So yeah, Blender aside, finished. Do you think we'll get any new Mac Minis?
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting if they did. I mean, I have no reason to suspect that they won't update the Mac Mini, the new iMac, the 24-inch, and hopefully they come out with like a 27-inch or even an iMac Pro. I mean, if they have a chip that can be the Pro chip for 16-inch MacBook Pros, throw that thing in an iMac and you'd make so many people happy, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
I mean, the only Intel Macs that are still being sold are the higher end, if you can call it that, Mac Mini. IO-wise, the higher end Mac Mini. Yes. It used to be the only Mac Mini with 10 gigabit Ethernet. Now it's one of two Mac Minis with 10 gigabit Ethernet. But it does also have 4 Thunderbolt ports, so it's more expandable. As you said before, external GPUs, all sorts of things you can do with it. So hopefully a new Mac Mini kind of follows up with this, has 4 Thunderbolt ports, maybe support for 4 external 6K displays. Like maybe that's the use case of like a super powered little thing that you don't need to be expandable, right? That could be really, really cool. And then, as you said, the iMac Pro, maybe the big iMac is just going to be the iMac Pro. Maybe it's going to be a separate product altogether. We don't really know, but it kind of fits well. You have the small non-Pro thing, and then you have the larger Pro thing that has more capabilities processing-wise, right?
Yep. Be interesting. I think the iMac Pro is 27 inches, right?
Yes.
Be interesting to see a bigger one, although I think for a lot of people, including myself, 27 inches is like a really good sweet spot for size. I know you, Mr. Pro Display XDR, have a larger monitor than that, so I don't know if you think it would be nicer to have a display that maybe matches the physical dimensions diagonally of the Pro Display XDR. I don't know.
Well, just like there's going to be a new MacBook Pro that is rumored in 14 and 16, maybe the new iMac Pro is going to come out in both 2732 or 2730 in 2 different sizes. Like, I could totally see that happening.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do you think we're going to maybe get new displays? Like external displays?
It would be really nice. I think it would be a welcome addition to have something that isn't $6,000, but also isn't a Thunderbolt 2 display. There's not been a good middle ground for a while, and I found it so weird when Apple was just like, hey, we've got this 5K LG display, and you're like, this is really weird coming in from an Apple, presentation. So if they could go back to making a really good Thunderbolt / USB 4 display, I would very much enjoy that.
And in a variety of sizes, right? Like if their display, you can have a small one that's high density. You can have a little bit bigger, and then ginormous. If those can be the sizes that are available, like people would be really happy with that. It lets people size according to the space they have. Like the same reason a lot of people went for the smaller iMac compared to the bigger one is because they didn't have space for a bigger one. So maybe someone wants a Mac Mini with 2 smaller displays because that's how they work. That would be really neat for Apple to make available.
I think even give me a chassis that looks exactly the same as an iMac, but it's just a display. That would be cool. I would love that. I think they look awesome, but
it won't align with the iMacs side by side.
Yeah, okay.
The displays never did, which is super ironic.
Good point. I don't know how to solve that one.
They'll be in slightly different colors.
Oh no! Just make them like darker shades. Oh
no, different shades. It's the new fall collection.
No, please don't do that. That would be bad. It'd be cool though. Going back to colors, it'd be really cool if they keep the colors on the iMacs like indefinitely. I don't know if it'd be nice to have maybe refreshes or like different colors, slightly tweak them, but I hope that they keep the colored iMacs around. And also, like you said, be awesome to bring them to at least the MacBook Air.
This week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Pennant, calling all sports fans. Want to keep track of the season, but there's so many teams and not enough time? Check out Pennant. Pennant provides sports standings at a glance. Pennant displays league standings as a simple bar chart where the best teams rise to the top throughout the season. Of course, you can dig in deeper with team stats, game results, and more. Version 10 introduced the all-new, customizable My Pennant view, where you can build a wide selection of visualizations for any sport, division, or team. Unlock Pennant Premium to add as many blocks as you'd like, and put all of them on your home screen as a widget. Whether you follow MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, or MLS, Pennant has you covered, with more sports and leagues coming soon. Thank you so much to Pennant for sponsoring Code Completion. Download Pennant on the iOS App Store today. So now that we've gone through our topics, it's time for Complete the Code, where we quiz our listeners on your knowledge of Swift, Apple, and all things development. Spencer?
So we have one winner this week, Andrew, who wrote in to say, you can simply update your constraints in the method before calling super. So as an example, the method was overriding the function update view constraints, and at the end of the method, it had super.update view constraints. So the question was, what goes in here? So as an example, you could have something like maybe two arrays of constraints that you want to kind of switch between. So you could deactivate both of those constraints and then just have whatever conditional logic you wanted, maybe if they were in portrait mode or landscape mode or something, and just activate one array of constraints per your conditions. And then once super is called, it should update those constraints.
Yep, I found this super useful when I was playing around with it. Like, just to have two properties on your view that just declare an array of constraints. It's in one place, easy to update, and then just have some simple conditionals to switch between 1, 2, or 3 different variations.
I really like that it's in just a constant of an array of constraints. That I think makes it really easy.
Mm-hmm. And all programmatic. Goodbye.
Yeah, exactly.
Zibs.
That's awesome. So this week we have another UI kit question for you. So if you're listening to the podcast, as always, you can check the podcast art or the show notes to follow along. So what can go wrong in this code that switches on an index path when a cell is tapped?
So if you need a hint, listen to last week's episode. But for everyone else, good luck. And if you think you can complete the code, tweet your answers to us with hashtag CompleteTheCode, all one word. And the first to get it right will get a shout out on the following week's show. So, as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at CodeCompletion to know when new episodes get released. And feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with all your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's really your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. So once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis on Twitter for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buniol. That's DimitRiBouniol. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.